The Alaskan air, sharp and unforgiving, bit at Elara's exposed skin. Snow, fine as dust, swirled around her, driven by a wind that sang a mournful tune through the skeletal branches of the spruce trees. Her moccasins, once warm and supple, offered little protection against the frozen ground, each step a dull ache in her weary bones. She gripped the tattered edges of her hide tunic, pulling it tighter, though it was a futile attempt against the relentless cold that had seeped into her very core. Days had blurred into a desperate, solitary journey since the raid. The memory was a raw wound, fresh and burning, the guttural shouts, the acrid smell of smoke, the terrified screams of her kin, her clan, the people of the Raven, scattered like embers in the wind. Her eyes, usually bright and keen, were now dulled with exhaustion and unshed tears. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of ice, sent a jolt of terror through her, conjuring images of the men who had descended upon her village like wolves. Russian fur traders, with their harsh language and cold eyes, had taken everything. Her family, her home, her sense of belonging, all gone. She was a ghost in her own land, a whisper in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, a constant, sharp reminder of her vulnerability. She hadn't eaten properly in what felt like an eternity, surviving on what little she could forage, frozen berries, a scrap of dried fish if she was lucky. The vast, white expanse of the landscape seemed to mock her, its beauty a stark contrast to the desolation within her. As dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and grey, Elara stumbled upon a barely visible trail, a faint indentation in the snow that promised some form of human passage. Hope, a fragile ember, flickered within her. It was a risky gamble. It could lead her to more danger, but the alternative was succumbing to the cold and starvation. With renewed, albeit shaky, resolve, she followed it, her breath pluming in frosty clouds before her. The trees grew denser, their snow-laden branches heavy with silence. A faint scent, unfamiliar yet distinctly human, reached her nostrils. Smoke, and something else, something metallic and sharp. Fear warred with desperation. She moved cautiously, each step a calculated risk, until a flickering light pierced the deepening gloom. A small, roughly constructed cabin, smoke curling lazily from its chimney, stood nestled among the trees. Hesitation gnawed at her. Her people had taught her caution, especially around outsiders, yet the gnawing cold and the emptiness in her stomach pushed her forward. She approached the cabin, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a mixture of dread and a desperate primal hope. A single figure, broad-shouldered and cloaked in furs, emerged from the cabin, carrying an armload of firewood. He was a white man, clearly a fur trader, his face obscured by a thick beard. He paused, sensing her presence, and turned slowly. Their eyes met across the snowy expanse, a silent question hanging between them in the frigid Alaskan air. The man, a towering figure against the twilight, held her gaze. His expression was unreadable, a mix of surprise and something else Elara couldn't decipher. He lowered the firewood, a soft thud on the snow, and slowly raised a hand, palm open, in a gesture she recognized as peace. "Hello?" he rumbled, his voice deep and rough, yet not unkind. He spoke in a heavily accented English, a language she understood fragments of from sporadic encounters with traders. Elara remained frozen, ready to flee at the slightest sign of aggression. Her silence, a shield against the overwhelming fear, stretched between them. The wind whipped around them, emphasizing the isolation. He seemed to understand her apprehension. Slowly, carefully, he gestured towards the cabin. "Come in, it's cold." His words were simple, direct. Elara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the vast wilderness. But the biting cold, The exhaustion that weighed on her limbs and the tantalizing scent of the smoke, promising warmth, were powerful persuaders. She took a tentative step forward, then another, her eyes never leaving his. He backed away slowly, giving her space, allowing her to dictate the pace. He opened the crude wooden door, revealing a small, dimly lit interior, a fire crackling merrily in a stone hearth. The warmth that washed over her as she stepped inside was immediate, a balm to her frozen skin. It was a single room, cluttered with traps, furs, and a few basic cooking implements. The man closed the door gently, sealing out the biting wind. He gestured to a worn log near the fire. "Sit." Elara sank onto it, her legs trembling with relief. The warmth began to thaw the ice in her veins, and with it, a wave of exhaustion washed over her. The man moved about, not speaking, his movements unhurried. He placed a metal pot over the fire, and soon the comforting aroma of boiling water filled the air. He offered her a mug of hot tea, dark and fragrant. She clutched it with both hands, feeling the heat seep into her chilled fingers. He sat opposite her, tending the fire, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaotic storm of her emotions. He seemed to understand she wasn't ready to speak, offering no questions, only a comforting silence. After a while, he offered her a piece of dried meat and some hardtack. The food was simple, but to Elara, it was a feast. As she ate, the warmth of the fire, the tea, and the unexpected kindness began to chip away at the frozen shell around her heart. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a predator, but a man with weathered lines around his eyes, eyes that held a quiet understanding. The fear had not entirely dissipated, but it was overshadowed by a fragile sense of safety, a feeling she hadn't known since the raid. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but filled with a delicate understanding. Elara finished her meal, feeling a strength slowly returning to her limbs. The man, whose name she didn't know, seemed content to simply watch the flickering flames. He had a strong, solid presence, a stark contrast to the fleeting, violent figures who had shattered her world. The cabin, though small and rough, felt like a sanctuary. Outside, the wind howled its relentless lament, but within these wooden walls there was a fragile peace. Finally, Elara found her voice, a whisper barely audible above the crackle of the fire. My clan." She trailed off, the words catching in her throat, the memory too fresh, too painful. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. The man looked at her, his gaze unwavering, compassionate. He didn't interrupt, simply waited. They took them," she managed to choke out, the words tumbling out in a rush, a torrent of grief she had held captive for too long. "The Russians, they came. Fire, so much fire." Her voice was ragged, raw with pain. He nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "The Russians," he echoed, his voice low, tinged with a weariness she recognized. "They cause much trouble here, for all of us." His words were not an explanation, but an acknowledgement of a shared burden, a grim reality of the land. He reached for a small leather pouch, pulled out a piece of cured tobacco, and began to slowly pack his pipe. The familiar scent of tobacco filled the air, grounding her a little. He didn't press her for more details, allowing her to process her emotions. Elara continued, her voice gaining a little more strength, as if unburdening herself was a physical act. "They took the furs, the food, everything. They took the women and children." Her voice cracked on the last words. The image of her mother, her sisters, being dragged away burned into her mind. "I ran, hid in the forest, for days." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if to physically hold her shattered pieces together. The man listened, his eyes reflecting the sorrow in hers. He lit his pipe, a small puff of smoke rising into the air, a silent offering to her pain. "My name is Theron," he said, finally breaking the silence. I am a fur trader, yes, but not like those you speak of. I came to this land for peace, not to take it from others." His voice was earnest, and Elara, despite her deep distrust, felt a sliver of belief. He was different. There was a quiet strength about him, but also a profound weariness, as if he too carried unseen burdens. The snow continued to fall outside, a thick blanket covering the world, but inside, a small, tentative bridge was being built between two strangers, bound by the harsh realities of a shared land. The next morning, the world outside Theron's cabin was a pristine white canvas, the fresh snow muffling all sound. Elara awoke to the comforting aroma of brewing coffee and frying fish. Theron was already up, stoking the fire. He offered her a bowl of porridge and a piece of the freshly cooked fish. It was simple fare, but after days of near starvation, it tasted like a feast. They ate in comfortable silence, the initial tension between them having eased into a fragile truce. Elara still harbored a deep-seated caution, a lifetime of lessons about outsiders, but Theron's quiet kindness chipped away at her defenses. He spent the morning mending traps and organizing his small stock of furs. Elara watched him, observing his meticulous movements, his methodical approach to his work. He was a man of the wilderness, clearly skilled and self-sufficient. She noticed the small details, the calloused hands, the worn but well-maintained tools, the way he moved with an unhurried grace. He never asked her about her plans, never pressed her for more details about the raid. He simply allowed her to exist, to heal, to simply be. This unspoken understanding was a balm to her wounded spirit. As the day progressed, the initial shock of her ordeal slowly began to recede, replaced by a dull ache of grief and a growing sense of displacement. Her people, her way of life, seemed irrevocably lost. Where would she go? What would she do? The vastness of the Alaskan wilderness, once her home, now felt like a terrifying, boundless void. She was adrift, a lone leaf in a raging current. Theron, sensing her quiet despair, offered a practical suggestion. "You can stay here for a while," he said, his voice gentle, "until you decide what to do. It is safer than being alone." Elara looked at him, surprised. The offer was generous, risky even, given the dangers of the land and the uncertain times. But his eyes held no guile, only a quiet sincerity. She considered his words. To venture back into the wilderness, alone and vulnerable, was to invite disaster. To stay with a stranger, a white man, went against everything she had been taught, yet this man had shown her only kindness. The warmth of the cabin, the simple comfort of regular meals, the sheer exhaustion of her journey, all weighed heavily on her decision. The alternative was a terrifying unknown. "Thank you," she finally whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. It was a commitment, a step into the unknown, but also a necessary act of survival. Theron simply nodded, a small, knowing smile touching his lips. He understood the gravity of her decision. The sun, a pale disk in the winter sky, began its slow descent, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of rose and violet. For the first time in days, Elara felt a faint glimmer of hope, a fragile promise of respite in the heart of a cruel winter. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't entirely alone anymore. If you're finding Elara's journey captivating and want to see how her story unfolds, remember to subscribe to the channel to catch all the upcoming chapters. Days bled into weeks, and Elara settled into a tentative routine in Theron's cabin. She helped him with small tasks, mending torn furs, preparing meals, and learning to identify the different animal tracks in the snow. She was a quick study, her innate knowledge of the land proving invaluable even in this new confined existence. Theron, in turn, shared his own knowledge of the trapping routes, the quirks of the weather, and the dangers posed by other, less scrupulous traders. Their conversations were sparse, often punctuated by long silences, but each shared glance, each shared task, deepened the unspoken bond between them. Elara slowly began to share more about her life before the raid. She spoke of her clan, the Tlingit, their traditions, their reliance on the salmon runs, the intricate carvings of their totems. Her voice would soften when she described the communal longhouses, the laughter of children, the wisdom of the elders. Theron listened intently, never interrupting, absorbing her words like a sponge. He had seen the devastation wrought by the encroaching world on native communities, but hearing it directly from Elara, witnessing her grief and resilience, gave it a new, poignant weight. He learned about the spiritual connection her people had to the land, a stark contrast to the purely transactional view held by many traders. One evening, as the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Theron spoke of his own past. He was from a small village in northern Europe, driven to Alaska by a restless spirit and a desire for independence. He spoke of harsh winters, difficult choices, and the quiet solitude that had become his companion. He wasn't running from anything specific, he explained, but rather seeking a life where he could be truly self-sufficient, away from the complexities of the burgeoning cities. His life, while different from hers, also bore the marks of hardship and a deep appreciation for the unforgiving beauty of the wilderness. He carried a quiet melancholy, a sense of having left something significant behind, though he never elaborated. As they shared these fragments of their lives, Elara began to see beyond the initial perception of him as simply a white man, a representative of the forces that had shattered her world. He was Theron, a man with his own story, his own struggles, and a surprising capacity for empathy. The lines between their different cultures, though still present, began to blur in the shared space of the small cabin. Outside, the winter deepened, the days growing shorter, the nights colder. The isolation was absolute, broken only by the visits of a curious fox or the distant howl of a wolf. Despite the relative safety, Elara still had nightmares. She would wake with a jolt, the screams of her clan echoing in her ears, the acrid smell of smoke thick in her nostrils. Theron would sometimes stir, offering a quiet, comforting presence. He would rekindle the fire, offer her a warm drink, and simply sit with her until the tremors subsided. In those moments, the unspoken understanding between them solidified. He wasn't just offering her shelter, he was offering her a haven, a place to grieve, to heal, and to slowly, tentatively begin to rebuild. The fragile peace in the cabin was shattered one crisp morning by a distant sound, the rhythmic thud of horses' hooves on frozen ground. Theron, who had been skinning a beaver, froze. His eyes, usually calm, sharpened with a sudden alertness. "Russians," he murmured, his voice low and grim. Elara's heart seized in her chest. The sound brought back a flood of terrifying memories, the panic she had felt during the raid. She looked at Theron, her face pale. He moved quickly, efficiently, dousing the fire and covering the still warm coals with ash. "Hide!" he ordered, his voice firm but not harsh. "Behind those furs! Do not make a sound!" He pointed to a stack of cured pelts in a dark corner of the cabin. Elara obeyed instantly, her body moving on instinct, her mind racing with renewed terror. She squeezed herself into the cramped space, pulling the heavy furs around her, the smell of animal hides filling her nostrils. Her breathing was shallow, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. From her hiding spot, she heard the sounds grow louder. Voices, rough and guttural, speaking Russian, the clinking of metal, the snorts of horses. Then a heavy thump against the cabin door. Theron's voice, calm and steady, greeted them. "Good day, gentlemen. What brings you to my humble abode?" There was a forced cordiality in his tone that Elara recognized as a shield. The voices outside were gruff, demanding. She heard the distinct sound of a rifle being cocked. "We heard there might be a runaway Tlingit girl in these parts," a voice boomed, heavily accented. "And we seek any furs you might be hoarding. We know your kind, trader. You hide your best goods." Elara held her breath, every muscle tense. The cabin door creaked open, letting in a blast of frigid air. Footsteps tramped inside, heavy and deliberate. She could feel the vibrations through the wooden floor. The scent of stale tobacco and unwashed men filled the small space. She heard the shuffling of objects, the sounds of things being moved, inspected. They were searching. Theron's voice remained even, though Elara could detect a subtle tension beneath his calm demeanor. "I have no runaway girl here, and my furs are few. This has been a lean season." The exchange continued, a dangerous dance of polite denials and thinly veiled threats. Elara imagined the scene. Armed men, their faces hardened by the harsh wilderness and their brutal trade, confronting Theron. She feared for him, for the quiet kindness he had shown her, for the sanctuary he had provided. Her small, fragile world within the cabin was once again under threat, and this time she was not alone in facing it. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Elara, hidden beneath the furs, strained to hear every word, every rustle. The heavy boots tramped closer to her hiding spot, and she squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for discovery. She could hear the distinct sound of furs being tossed aside, the cold air briefly touching her face. Her breath hitched. Suddenly, Theron's voice, sharper this time, cut through the air. "Careful with those, they're for a client in Sitka, finest otter pelts." The distraction worked. The footsteps paused, and she heard a grunt of interest from one of the Russians. The focus shifted, the valuable furs a more immediate prize than a potentially non-existent runaway. She heard the distinct rustle of the furs being examined, their quality assessed. "These are good," one of the men grumbled, a note of greed in his voice. "Perhaps we will take them as payment for our troubles." Theron let out a sigh, a theatrical display of resignation. "As you wish. It is a harsh world for a small trader." He was sacrificing his livelihood to protect her, a sacrifice that resonated deeply within Elara. She felt a surge of gratitude mixed with a profound helplessness. The men continued their search for a few more minutes, then seemed to lose interest. They settled for a few of Theron's best furs and some of his meager provisions, stomping around with an air of arrogant entitlement. Theron remained outwardly calm, though Elara could sense the simmering anger beneath his composed exterior. "No sign of the girl," one of them finally declared, turning to leave. "Perhaps she froze in the snow." A chilling chuckle followed. "Perhaps," Theron replied, his voice carefully neutral. "The wilderness is unforgiving." "Icky." The cabin door creaked open again, and the cold returned. Elara heard the sounds of horses being mounted, the jingle of harness, and then, slowly, the rhythmic thud of hooves fading into the distance. She remained frozen, not daring to move, until the silence was absolute, broken only by the distant caw of a raven. After what felt like an eternity, Theron cautiously uncovered her. Elara emerged, trembling, her face streaked with tears and dirt. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a shared relief, a shared ordeal. "They're gone," he said, his voice quiet. He went to the door and peered out, scanning the horizon before closing it firmly. The immediate danger had passed, but the encounter left a chilling reminder of the ever-present threat. The world outside their small cabin was perilous, and their sanctuary was not as secure as it had seemed. Don't miss a single moment of Elara's incredible journey. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can follow every twist and turn of the Tlingit girl whispered, "They took my clan." The fur trader lit a fire and stayed beside her. The Russian visit brought new tension. Elara felt an urgent need to leave Theron's cabin. She was a burden, putting him at risk. This thought gnawed at her, overshadowing her gratitude. She watched the endless snow, wrestling with her impossible choice. Where to go? What was left for her? Theron sensed her struggle. He stopped urging her to stay, understanding her need for agency and safety. One evening, sharing a silent meal, he spoke gently. "You are not a burden, Elara, but I understand if you must leave." His words affirmed her autonomy, respecting her right to choose. Elara looked at him, sorrow and determination in her eyes. "I must find my people," she vowed, "or what's left. I can't stay safe while they are gone." The truth settled heavily. Her spirit demanded action, a quest for answers, a search for any remaining threads of her shattered past. She couldn't merely exist while her clan's fate remained a mystery. Theron listened, his gaze steady. "The north is harsh," he warned, not dissuading her but preparing her, "and dangerous. The Russians are everywhere." Elara nodded, knowing the risks she'd already lived. "I know," she replied, voice firm, "but I must know." The thought of venturing back into the desolate wilderness alone was terrifying, but remaining idle was worse. Over the next few days, Theron helped her prepare. He shared knowledge of safe routes, shelter, and how to avoid traders. He gave her a sturdy knife, a warm blanket, and a small pouch of dried meat and berries, provisions he could ill afford but gave freely. His quiet support was a lifeline, a testament to their unexpected bond. The departure day was clear and cold. Elara stood outside, her borrowed pack heavy. She turned to Theron, heart swelling. "Thank you," she said, voice thick, "for everything." He nodded, sadness in his eyes. He extended a hand, and she took it, her small hand swallowed by his large, calloused one. It was a silent farewell, acknowledging their profound impact on each other. She turned, beginning her solitary journey north, a determined figure swallowed by the vast, unforgiving landscape. Elara walked, day after day, the rhythmic crunch of snow her only companion in the vast wilderness. The landscape blurred white and grey, punctuated by dark evergreens. Her strong resolve was tested by biting cold, gnawing hunger, and crushing loneliness. She often thought of Theron, his cabin's warmth, his kindness, a beacon in the bleakness, a reminder that human connection offered solace. She followed ancient Tlingit trails, faint paths etched by generations. These were a small comfort, a whisper of the past, a connection to the people she desperately sought. She hunted small game, relying on ancestral skills to set snares, conserving every morsel. Nights were hardest, cold seeping into her bones, the wilderness amplifying her solitude. She'd huddle beneath her blanket, knife clutched, listening to the night's sounds. Her journey was perilous. She spotted fresh wolf tracks and once, a distant grizzly. She learned to read the signs, trust her instincts, and move with stealth. She avoided other fur traders, circling wide, remembering the terrifying encounter at Theron's cabin. Her distrust, though softened by Theron, remained a powerful survival instinct. As she moved north, the terrain grew harsher, mountains more imposing, snow deepened, days shortened, the sun barely cresting the horizon. She knew she was heading into remote regions, less frequented by traders, more likely to hold remnants of her people. Hope, though flickering, was a persistent ember. She clung to the possibility that some clan members had escaped, found refuge in inaccessible territories. One afternoon, as a blizzard gathered, threatening a whiteout, Elara spotted something. Not a cabin, but broken branches, a subtle Tlingit trail marker. It indicated a hidden path, a place of refuge. Adrenaline coursed through her, chasing away cold and exhaustion. She pressed on, heart pounding with desperate hope, convinced this silent sign led not just to shelter, but to rediscovering a piece of her lost world. The blizzard raged, wind a roaring beast, snow a blinding curtain. Elara struggled, body screaming with exhaustion, but the trail markers spurred her on. The path led into a thick grove of ancient trees, offering some shelter. Finally, through the swirling white she saw it, a cluster of structures, half buried, a makeshift camp. Smoke curled from a central fire, and a faint, familiar scent reached her. Tears blurred her vision. She pushed through the drifts and stumbled into the clearing. Figures cloaked in furs moved around the fire. They were Tlingit, her people. A gasp escaped her, catching a woman's attention. The woman turned, eyes widening in disbelief, then recognition. "Elara!" she cried, voice ringing with shock and joy. It was her aunt, her mother's sister, whom she'd thought lost forever. She was instantly enveloped in a hug, a warmth that transcended the cold, an embrace of shared grief and unimaginable relief. Other familiar faces emerged from shelters, scarred by hardship but alive. Not everyone had survived the raid, but many had escaped, seeking refuge in this remote valley. They had lived in constant fear, always moving, always vigilant, but they had endured. Elara recounted her ordeal, voice choked with emotion, speaking of the raid, her solitary journey, and Theron's unexpected kindness. Her aunt and the elders listened, faces grim, but also gaining a new understanding of the outside world. They spoke of their own brutal journey, the cold, the relentless Russian pursuit, and their desperate search for a haven. They had lost much, but found each other. The humble camp was a testament to their resilience. They had built shelters, set traps, and survived the unforgiving wilderness. Elara, though still bearing deep trauma, felt a profound sense of belonging. She was home, not in her childhood longhouse, but among the surviving fragments of her family, her clan. Her journey wasn't over. The fight for their survival would continue. But now, she wasn't alone. She had found her people, and in their shared strength, she found the resolve to face the future, built on the past's ashes, nourished by community and resilience. Thank you for joining us on Elara's incredible journey. If you've been moved by her story of resilience, loss, and the enduring power of human connection, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us tell more powerful, realistic stories like this one. We hope to see you in our next video.